Okay, so I have 6 o'clock. I don't know if Art is joining us or not. We should probably go ahead and call the meeting to order. Going to begin with roll call of the members of the committee. Myself, Margaret Morris. We have Ryan Wallace. We have Theo Anthony. And we have Mohammed Ronnie. So that's the committee members. Also, I see Linda obviously is present. I see Steve Dunn from the public. Tom is present. We have other council members. We have Vicky and Dominic are on. Crystal Peck, who is going to be discussing her memorandum, is on. And Carol from Gossips is on. Did I miss anybody in the roll call? Okay. So first order of business, review of minutes. Does anyone have any issues with the minutes from our last meeting?
Nope, they're accurate to me. Thank you, Linda, as always.
Yep, thank you. Can we have a motion to accept?
I'll motion.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, anybody opposed to accepting the minutes? Okay, everyone else, aye?
Aye.
Okay, so that's accepted. So the order of business this evening is primarily to discuss Crystal Peck's advice to us regarding the issue of the need to change the ward boundaries. So as you recall, back in February, we had a special meeting. Steve Dunn presented a number of scenarios. Steve, as you know, had worked on the map that was adopted for fair and equal because we were over the 10% differential between the largest and smallest ward. According to the New York State law, we were required to look at bringing that within compliance. We voted unanimously in favor of a least disruption approach, which would move a small number of people from the first ward to the third, and an even smaller number from the third to the fourth. So after that meeting, we were there was some confusion about whether or not we needed to do that. Crystal did send us a memorandum with her advice on what we do or do not need to do with regard to changing the districting and so on. So where we are tonight is that we now need to go back to where we were in February and talk about what we need to do with regard to the boundaries. So I would like to organize this discussion around 3 separate items. The first is that our local law had a date of July 1 for us to come into compliance. However, not only with the delays, but also I believe feedback, Crystal, that really it needs to any changes that we make need to be made before February. So that law needed to be amended, that code needed to be amended to say that we would adopt a change in the ward lines and then make it effective January 1, which will be effective January 1 of 2023, it would not be immediately. So I do not think that there is any controversy around this approach that we're going to adopt changes to the boundaries. We're going to talk about what changes do or do not need to be made momentarily, but I do not think there's any major controversy around modifying the language to say that we will adopt the proposed boundaries, which would go into effect in January of 2023, in the event that we end up changing boundaries, which is the second discussion. So is there any comment regarding that? Are we all okay with that approach? Any concerns?
No, I think we're all in a line. I mean, I apologize. I was trying to keep up on some of the back and forth today.
Yeah, oh, there's a lot.
Yeah, it's because a little difficult, but yes, getting everything in line so that we can have the decision made. And Margaret, are you proposing that we would have something introduced by the informal June to formalize by the June meeting so that we're in shape
Yes.
for?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And this is something the full council will need to do. So we're going to make a recommendation to the council that we're going to, and I circulated again the revision to the law that was adopted, I think in 2016, that delineated all of the wards. I circulated that basically describes the changes that we had voted on unanimously back in February. But yeah, we would make a recommendation to the full council and the full council would adopt this. But I don't want to get ahead of the next part of the discussion, because the next part of the discussion is actually changing the boundaries. The first part here is just, we're all good with adopting by July 1 and putting it into effect in January. And that's what we would recommend to the Common Council, to the full council. Any questions from anyone on that?
Nope.
Okay, good. So the second part of our discussion this evening is going to be, because I've had some discussion back and forth with Crystal on this, whether or not it is even necessary to make changes to the boundaries, whether there's any rationale where we could argue that we should not make any change and we should simply leave things as they are. And Crystal's going to discuss that with us. I think where we are right now is that we do need to change the boundaries, but I'm going to leave that to Crystal. And then the third item that we need to talk about is the referendum issue, because at the moment there is a requirement, because of the situation with the county supervisors. If the boundaries relating to the county supervisors change and they are elected from the wards, there's potentially a need for a referendum, which would be in the fall, in November. And the drop dead date for getting anything on the ballot is August 8th. I have not had an opportunity to talk to Ken Dow about that. I know that Crystal has, but that's a separate issue. And there has also been some discussion today with Dee Dee Barrett's office around amending that law, which requires a referendum for the any change to the boundaries for the supervisors. So that is not something we can resolve tonight, but that'll be the third part of our conversation. So what I'd like to do now is hand this over to Crystal. For Crystal, if one of you at City Hall could pull up the memorandum, and then Crystal can walk us through her advice to the committee.
And let's try this again. Thank you, Margaret. The memo I put together for the committee was, my understanding was both to provide a detail on the procedure that was going to be required for redistricting, but also a little bit about, I thought it would be beneficial for the committee as well, a little bit of the reasoning behind redistricting and why it's in the standards that apply to it, which is why you've got that section initially about the general requirements when you're talking about redistricting. And that's really where this 10% comes into play. So there have been Supreme Court decisions, as you guys have seen in here, that have said that if there's a deviation between your highest population and your lowest population of more than 10%, it is considered prima facie evidence of unconstitutionality, that it's not going to meet the equal protection clause. And what that essentially means is that it doesn't mean that automatically it gets struck down. What it means is that if you're going to go beyond that 10% deviation, like we have here, that 12.8%, you really have to have a legitimate non-discriminatory reason for that. And after I sent this memo out on, I think Saturday, and Margaret and I had some conversations, and she was asking, well, is it really necessary then? Do we have justification? I dug in a little bit more to the case law that talked about when there was justification and when there's not justification. And there is Supreme Court cases and lower level cases that talk about justification being found when you have to preserve the integrity of political subdivision lines, or when there is a concern if you reapportion, whether it will dilute the minority vote. Now, in this specific case, as we dug into it with the city of Hudson, as we dug into it a little bit more, when you're talking about preserving the integrity of political subdivision lines, those cases are usually from states that have a constitutional provision in their state constitution, which says that you need to at all, if at all possible, not interfere with the integrity of the political subdivision lines. We don't have that here in New York State. So I don't really think that that justification is going to apply here. And in discussing some of the demographic numbers with how the ward boundaries are right now and the reapportionment, it doesn't appear that there would be justification for remaining or going beyond that 10% because of concerns about diluting, say, a minority ward or a minority vote. So from what I've seen so far, and it has not been a deep dive at all, but just preliminarily, it does not appear that there is strong justification for exceeding the 10% deviation. Going beyond that, so if that's the case and the council then decides that it wants to go ahead and reapportion, that the next step is going through that process. And Margaret, I don't know if you want me to stop there, if you want me to get into the whole referendum and the time frame.
We're going to we'll talk about the referendum next. So I just want to make sure everybody was on the same page here. We're pretty much back to where we were in February, just to remind everybody. So one of the things that I did was go into the application that has the 2020 census data. And I looked at the ethnic distribution of all of the wards after the change, and then the two small groups that get moved from one ward to another. So we have 75 people going from first to third, and we have 40 people going from third to fourth. And as I will put this in the spreadsheet for you and calculate the pre-ethnic distribution and post-ethnic distribution, but I do not see anything in these data that would suggest that this move is going to make any significant difference to first ward distribution by ethnicity or third and fourth, which are the other two wards that have an impact. Overall, after this, so in the city as a whole, 60% of the population is white, 39.9% is minority. First ward, which is the one that we are trying to take people out of once we have removed them, would be at 65% white, and let's see, 65% white to 66%. Then we have 10% Hispanic, 16% African American, 6% Asian, and 3% other. So the 75 people who moved to the third ward are 68% white. So it's kind of very comparable to, that wouldn't have made very much difference there. The Hispanic numbers are fairly low. 22% of the people moving are Hispanic. However, when you put that in the context of 1,100 people, it's not a large number of people. And I don't think it would make a big difference to the Hispanic population in the first ward if they did not move. I think it might be like a 12% instead of 10%. Very few African Americans are impacted, only 5.3% of those moving, which is of 75 people. I'm too tired to do the math right now. So it's only a couple of people moving who are African American. So then when we look at the 40 folks who are moving third to fourth, again, these are very, very small numbers, and they're not going to have any major impact on ethnicity either within the third or fourth ward. So let me see. The third ward currently has a 63% white population, and 55% of the people moving of the 40, that's about 21 people, are white, and African American 25%, which is, what is that, 10 people are moving from third to fourth. Fourth ward has an African American population of 17.8 with these numbers, So again, you know, with 1,000 people, your 10 people are making up like a very small percent change. So I don't really see anything in the data that would suggest that what we're doing here is going to in any way make any significant difference to the distribution by ethnicity. Obviously, as we all know, the one majority-minority ward that we have is the second ward, which is 68% minority, made up of 75.5% Asian and 36.6% African American. And that ward is not being impacted in any way by the shift of people from first and third. So that's, I don't see anything there at all that's going to show any shift in demographics with this change. So are we in agreement? Do we have any questions about whether or not we need to make this change? And then we can get into the discussion of the process and what we're going to do about the issue around the referendum, whether we want to talk about any approach to divorcing the supervisor elections from the wards, because that's what's driving the need for the referendum. But is there any questions around, excuse me, around the numbers or the distributions that we had already discussed back in February?
Margaret, I had my hand up, but
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So I was just trying to basically wrap my head around the data that you're pointing out. Those proposed demographic shifts are a result of what we already discussed in our original meeting. Okay, this is not like new proposal to move anything. Okay.
No,
I just wanted to make sure.
All I did, Ronnie, was I went back to the map because questions had been raised about whether you're going to have any major demographic impact and so forth. So I went back into the map and I pulled out the demographic data for the various groups, and for the little group in first that's going to move to third, and then for the 40 people shifting between third and fourth. And while the numbers, when you look at the 75 folks moving from first to third and the 40 folks going from third to fourth, you look at the percent. So for example, there are no Asians impacted by the first to third, 17.5% in the third to fourth, but that's only people.
So Margaret, the reason I was asking the question is, you know, a lot of numbers were just thrown out in the last 5 minutes, and I just wanted to ensure that for posterity's sake, those numbers are posted somewhere. That's it. That's only.
all I can tell you is it's 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't.
Oh yes, you're in England right now. I understand. Yeah, sorry.
I'm putting it in a. What I'm going to do, Ronnie, is I'm going to put it in a spreadsheet. And so for the numbers in the application, so let's take the first ward. These are post modification. There are 1,158 people in the first ward, and it gives you all of the ethnicity. Then if you click on the little cell of the 75 people, you can see the ethnicity of those 75, and the same for the 40. So what I'm going to do is give you a spreadsheet with the post distribution ethnicity, and then I'm going to calculate the modification ethnicity. So it's going to be very clear. This is what it looks like afterwards. This is what it looked like before. And I will put that in a spreadsheet and get it out to everybody in the next day or two.
Yeah, just so that.
Yeah, no, we have to have that in. Yeah, we have to have it.
Just so if public wants to refer to those data, that we don't really have to, you know, dig back through. Yeah, understood. Thank you, Margaret.
Absolutely.
Can I ask a quick question of Crystal, actually, about what she was just saying? You were saying that does not appear to be current justification to remain beyond the 10% deviation. Is that what, just out of curiosity, what are some, like, you don't have to do an exhaustive list, but what are some like justifiable reasons that would allow a ward to be beyond the 10% deviation?
The two main ones that I saw discussed in the case law was the preserving integrity of political subdivision boundaries. But all of the cases I talked to about that, they were Supreme Court level cases, and they dealt with other states and other states' constitutional requirements that were, that played into how reapportioning has to work in those states. And that was where the Supreme Court said, okay, I see you guys are going, I'm going to speak generally. I see that you're going beyond that 10% deviation. And because you were trying to comply with your state constitutional requirements and it's meeting this purpose and you're doing it essentially in the least way possible, we're going to say that that's okay. You've now established a legitimate non-discriminatory reason to go beyond that 10%. Another reason, and that's usually it's based on like a policy reason. Another reason that I've seen spoken about, which was talking about dilution of minority votes. So say in order to try to get under that 10%, when you reapportion, what happens is you dilute, say, a minority majority district. Suddenly, because you're changing the numbers, that's no longer going to possibly be a minority majority district. So now you're actually diluting the minority voice, even though you're trying to comply with the equal protection. And that's where the Supreme Court has looked at it in cases, courts have looked at this and said, you know what? This is a legitimate non-discriminatory purpose to go above that 10%. You're still working within the bounds of the equal protection clause. So those were the two that really jumped out at me. Though I'll be honest, I spent, Monday afternoon kind of digging into this. I'm sure that there is a breadth of more case law that I really could get into to try to define some other reasons. But those were the two that really jumped out.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm just to clarify, like the legal conflict here, it's just that you're saying New York State does not have that mandate for the integrity of the political divisions.
I didn't see that was in our state constitution, where you would find it in other states that was playing a part in it. Yeah. And with the numbers, I haven't had a chance to look at like the numbers on paper, but in reviewing them with Margaret, it doesn't appear that other factor talking about, dilution of the minority vote would play a role here either. I did go into the Davies redistricting, website and pull the demographics from there, from the maps that were proposed by Steve Dunn. I tried to pull the same from the ward districts that are, in place now to kind of dig into it, but I wasn't seeing it. Now, if there's an additional justification out there, if the council felt strongly about not reapportioning, it's something that should be discussed, but everyone just needs to know it can't be a generalization. It has to be a very specific justification that can be articulated if this is challenged, because you have to show that there's a legitimate reason for going beyond that 10% deviation.
Right.
Theo, we have a question from Verity Smith regarding the document that I'm going to put together with all of the ethnic breakout as to whether or not this will be available to the public. So yes, all documents that we review here in this committee are public documents. Anything that we discuss is public. They will be posted as in the document center. They will be on the city website. I guess they will be posted probably as documents for the full council, actually, because the next place this is going is to the full council. But that will be available. The public will not have to ask for it. It will be part of our public document set. Let's see if we have any other questions. Steve Dunn has his hand up. Steve, go ahead.
Hello. I just find it surreal that the very tiny population changes that were made at the direction of the legal committee to minimize a least change map have caused this feeding frenzy. It's kind of crazy. The original map that was drawn by Fair and Equal was very careful to attend and respect minority interests and voting power. And the idea these tiny changes would upset the apple cart on that, I find kind of amazing. And God knows how much in legal fees was spent on it, but believe me, that was not a good use of time. Just my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Anybody else? Any other questions on this part of the discussion?
No.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about the thorny issue of the referendum. And Crystal can speak to this. The reason we have to have a referendum is that, as I understand it, because our county supervisors are elected from the wards, any changes in the district lines for the supervisors are subject to a referendum. So the part of this that just as a non-lawyer, just a logical person makes absolutely no sense to me is that we are required to be in compliance with this 10% rule. And so if we put something on a referendum, getting the city to vote on this, and for some reason the people of Hudson object and say no, then where does that leave us with being in compliance? I don't understand how it works, that it's logical for us to do something to be in compliance legally and then to be told that we can't do it because we did a referendum. So that to me is very strange. Now, one thing that has come up, and I don't think anyone from Dee Dee's office is on. We were hoping Gunnar would be able to join us. But one thing that has come up is trying to work with Dee Dee Barrett or other people at the state level to amend that law and eliminate that referendum requirement. Whether that can be done before August 8th, which is the drop dead date for giving anything to the Board of Elections for a referendum, I do not know. I have not been able to speak to Dee Dee Barrett's office, but Crystal, if you can walk us through now the processes and issues with regard to the referendum.
Sure. So first, I have to say that logic and the law, they don't always have a happy place to meet in the middle. It doesn't always happen that way. Quite frequently, it does not. So what we have here is we have a municipal home rule law that says that if you're going to change the boundaries of a ward, and that will affect the boundaries from where the county supervisors are elected from, it is subject to mandatory referendum. This, and I detailed this in my memo. I had to do a deep dive into it because there was a big question as to whether this referendum provision applied, whether there was a way to essentially circumvent it because of the, when our charter was actually went into effect. Everything that I have found says that it does apply, and that the date, just simply the fact that we've had a charter in effect prior to the municipal home rule law is not a way around it. So really what this means is that the council can go ahead and it can reapportion its wards, but because those county supervisors are tied to those district boundaries or ward boundaries, that means it's going to go to referendum. Now, it's possible that it can go to referendum and it will not be, it'll be voted down. It's quite possible that it will, that could happen. And if that happens, then the city has a couple of options, essentially to just leave it as is, see if anyone challenges the wards. And if it does, attempt to talk to the court about justification of the fact that the city's tried to reapportion, it went to a referendum, it failed. There's not much that can be done at that point. The city can go back and try to reapportion the wards, come up with different district boundaries and put that before another referendum the following year to see if that will make a change. In the meantime, I do think it's a good idea for the city to look at, or the council to look at, how it can take away that tie between the county supervisors and the ward boundaries. I spoke to Ken Dow today again on that issue, talking about a couple different ways to handle that with the way the election districts are also come into play, because the election districts mirror the ward boundaries. Now, it can be a bit administratively burdensome, as the way Ken put it, by separating essentially the county supervisors from those ward boundaries. It's not impossible though, depending on how the council does it. And that is a process that really will require the council and this committee, if it wants to pursue it, to sit down, look at the entire city, look at the election districts and the ward boundaries, and then essentially do an overlay over that and see where it can come up with essentially new districts that will not create an excessively small election district, because you don't want that. You want your election district to have 300 or 400 people as a minimum in it, Because as Ken explained it, if you go lower than that, it takes away the ability for someone to vote anonymously. Because then it's very easy to find out who you're voting for, especially when you're dealing with absentee ballots. So you would have to go through and really take a look at the size of the election districts that are created, because no matter what, you're going to end up creating a couple more election districts. Now, when I talked to Ken about it, he said, think of it the way you look at a state senate or congressional districts. They cross over multiple boundary lines. So essentially what it means is that you might be going to your polling place and you might have two people living in the first ward. Well, those two people might have two different ballots. And it can become a little bit administratively burdensome for the Board of Elections, but Ken, the way Ken put it is if it's done correctly and you've got the right size election districts, the problem tends to be fairly minor. But it is something that can be done. And it's something that I think that should be looked at to be able to alleviate this problem. The other option would be to see if the state will essentially do something about this law and make it so that that's not an issue anymore, that referendum's not required. Now, a legislative action, I think it's probably impractical to think that that's going to happen within this year, which is really when the council needs to act. So regardless, I think that the referendum, my opinion and my recommendation is that the council does need to go through referendum on this issue this year, and that it should start thinking of ways to alleviate that in the future.
So, Crystal, I mean, the issue about the legislative piece amending the law, I think it's probably true that that's not going to happen before August 8th, but it could very well happen in January, in which case we would then, and they could make it retroactive or whatever, and then we could just go with our boundaries. And I think it's very important that if we attempt to do this, what we're doing is fair and reasonable, and for some reason it gets voted down, we at least have evidence that we have done due diligence and we have made our best effort to come into compliance with the 10% rule. I think that's very important. I don't favor the idea of new districts at all, because a lot of work went into creating the map that we have, which is currently geographically makes sense. And I think it would be very, very difficult to come up with new artificial districts that somehow make this separate. The only thing that would potentially really divorce the supervisors from the wards would be if we, for whatever reason, decided that we only wanted to have one statewide supervisor, or citywide supervisors. So if we changed the number and we said we're going to elect them citywide, and they were going to reduce the number, that would really be the only scenario where I think divorcing them would be feasible or reasonable. Creating new districts to get around this, to me, is probably not a good idea, but I'd like to hear what others think of that. Now, we have hands raised at the moment. Tom, I think you wanted to speak.
Yes, Margaret, and you partly addressed it. I think rather than creating new districts, the more reasonable idea is to create one district. That is to say, have one supervisor represent the entire city. As you know, we are unique in the county in that our supervisors are divided by ward, and it kind of diminishes our power on the county level. So I think the real solution is, and I never understood exactly what our authority in this matter is, but the real solution is to move to a single supervisor for the city. Thank you.
So, Tom, I think I see value to that, particularly because everything is done on, I believe it's done on a weighted voting situation. Correct. Right? But the one downside that I see to that, and I'd have to talk to the supervisors to get some sense of this, is that by having 5 supervisors, or more than one at any rate, we have enough people to have Hudson represented on multiple committees.
Yeah, but that's the argument I've heard also, but I don't see the value of that. It just means we're spread out on committees, but when it comes to the actual vote, we're spread out as well by our numbers.
That's the only rationale that I see in it.
Yeah, no, I know.
It may be that 2 citywide supervisors would be good because you'd have more than one person trying to get on committees, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I agree with you. So Steve, you had a question or comment?
First, Council President, Mr. DiPietro, you just pissed off 4 supervisors, or all 5. So you obviously.
Not actually. Believe it or not, Rich Scalera, I know, agrees with me.
Well, God bless him. He and I, we like each other, even though I screwed him on weighted voting. Anyway, and another downside of having separate districts and the horror of it all. And by the way, Mr. Kendow's concern about disclosing the identity of people, given that the population shifts are so small, may raise a problem, and all the administrative horror. You know what? It brings back to the city of Hudson the hated concept of that was struck down by 70% of the vote of weighted voting.
Yes.
Because now if you've got districts that are out of alignment for the supervisor,
Yep.
you're back to weighted voting. And Hudson believes in killing weighted voting everywhere it can, including the county, which may well have an unconstitutional system, but I'm too old and sick to sue them to blow it away. That's number one. So I just don't think having supervisorial districts that are separate and apart from older districts is vaguely feasible or appropriate at all, period. I think I wanted to say something else, but because I'm old, memory is the second thing to go. Maybe I'll come back to it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Let's see, do we have any other hands raised? Let me look here. No, I do not.
Margaret, I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think I'm trying to understand the necessity of complicating this. Crystal was saying that there's a possibility that we might, the referendum may lose if it comes to election, but are we basically arguing hypotheticals here, or do we actually anticipate actual challenges to the referendum?
Purely hypotheticals. To me, it just
And
makes no logical
is
sense. I like to look at what are the possible scenarios that could occur when we go down this particular flow chart, okay?
Right.
And one of them is we do all of this, and then the city, they for whatever reason, it gets voted down. But the upside of that is, well, we're making very minor changes here. So even if we didn't make changes, it's not as if anybody's going to be disenfranchised. And then having made our best effort and done due diligence, if the people vote against it, it kind of really forces the issue to the state to say you really need to change this referendum law because it's obviously not working. So there's that. And then if we were for any reason challenged, we would have a good justification for the fact that we couldn't come in under the 10% because we tried, and because of the referendum law, we weren't able to do it. So I'm thinking of it as a protective thing, but I like to always look at what are the scenarios that could emerge here.
Right. Just my opinion is, like, we've done most of the work and the discussions regarding this issue, and if we can remain within the law and set the referendum to what we already originally discussed, we should just move forward with it. And sure, I mean, discussing the hypotheticals is beneficial if a possibility of that happens, or if that possibility comes to reality, but I don't think we should bog ourselves down. Like, this is a possibility, so we should always have this, we should have this backup, we should have this backup, then we're just not gonna get anything done. That's just my opinion, Margaret.
No, we proceed, we absolutely proceed, but we proceed with full knowledge of the fact that in the event that X happens, what are its implications? And to me, the implications are that we are protected in the sense that we have done what we were supposed to do.
Surely, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Thank you.
Let's see, other comments. I'm going to go around the committee. Ryan, do you have anything on this that you want to add?
No, I'm a big fan. For a while, I've been saying, cut the size of the council down. We need one supervisor. We do not need this big of a government for a town of 6,600 people. That's it.
Okay. Theo?
Just enjoying the company tonight, listening and learning a lot.
Okay. So we've heard from Ronnie, and we don't have Art here tonight, so we've heard from everybody on the committee. Verity has her hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a question that I also put in the chat. I was wondering, I totally agree with the various comments that have been made about what, the undesirability of potentially making non-contiguous districts, as they call it. That seems like it could be rife with complication, though possible. So given the other options, I'm wondering, would a change to one supervisor, is that legislatable by the council by a city charter change? Or would that have to be subject to a referendum? Because if it's subject to referendum, it surely would fail if it had to happen in this timetable.
If you want me to speak to that, Margaret?
Sure.
Okay. Yes, I do believe it would be subject to referendum because you're dealing with changing the county supervisors.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that to me seems like a really tough referendum to run in the next few months. But maybe you guys can get a whole campaign around that, but you're going to have supervisors from all these wards upset and their constituents upset. I mean, I just don't know how that would work. Can you lay out how that would work?
Verity, I think this is the point that I was trying to make. I think we were just really discussing hypotheticals. I don't think that was a serious suggestion at this point in time, at least.
Not right now. Yeah, I don't know that.
Oh,
right
okay. I thought that you were still trying to make a decision between doing a referendum on the current, district change versus a referendum potentially on the supervisor change. So
No,
I misunderstood.
No, the issue, Verity, was that if we want to try to divorce the supervisors from the wards, that coming up with a whole series of new districts does not personally, it makes no sense to me.
Totally, and I agreed with that.
But the only other way to think about it is to say, okay, what if we were to rethink the supervisor situation and have one or two citywide supervisors that are untied to a ward? But I don't think that's something that would be undertaken in the next couple of months. That's just another way to think about divorcing the supervisors from the wards.
Right. Of course, I understood the options as laid out. I just didn't understand whether or not people were advocating to go ahead with the supervisor, adjustment. And because it seems like in this timetable, that's not really feasible. So if that's something down the road, then maybe you could build momentum around that if it requires an additional referendum. And I think I agree with Tom, there are good reasons for that. So thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
And also,
Steve, your hand, sorry, Crystal, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, just to be clear to the committee, I think that it would be incredibly ambitious to try to do that this year. That is something that you want to get through your reapportionment this year and then make some plans for the following years to fix some of this.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm pushing for too, Crystal. Let's just do what we discussed, and then surely, we can be prepared for a possibility in the future.
I think the reason it's coming up tonight, Crystal, is now is the time to have that conversation. Like, you need a full year to run that campaign. So we need alignment. We don't get alignment on this in like November, and then even then try to push through a one-shot deal. So
Steve, I think your hand is up. I don't know whether you had a new question or whether it's up from.
Yeah, I
before.
have some comments, a few. One is the idea of through a referendum eliminating forced supervisors is probably not going to happen this year or any year. It's just part of the syndrome. Maybe it will, I don't know. I think we all agree that having separate board lines and supervisor lines is a non-starter. But here is my concern and why I hate the idea of a referendum. Viscerally, as soon as we go for a referendum pressure is off in pushing through remedial legislation to get rid of this insane law, which law also, if it were adhered to, puts pressure on the dysfunctional, immoral, and arguably illegal system that Columbia County has, which is in essence a Republican gerrymander. So I want to keep the fire on, put pressure, saying we got to get this law changed, Dee Barrett, whomever, and get it done. And we need to have confidence it's getting done, or everybody's going to be sued. And I'm going to make sure everybody gets sued. Believe me, assuming I'm alive, which is an assumption, I admit. So what I'm saying is, you know, we've got a little bit of time. Let's talk to Dee Barrett's office. Let's discuss the possibilities. Let's discuss the confidence we can have this hideous, ludicrous law to the extent it applies. I think the arguments are very strong that it's unenforceable because it creates the necessity to have a referendum to comply with is otherwise the law, which was missed in the legal memorandum we all saw, and go from there. And I'm deeply concerned as soon as we go the referendum route, pressure's off, you know, life is beautiful, we don't have to do anything. And as we all know, the default option in Hudson is to do nothing. And I dissent from that, among other things. So I hope you have all read my letter and take it seriously, because I mean each and everything I said as long as I'm alive. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Hillary, your hand is up. You're muted right now.
Hi, thank you. I think this is just a point of order, and Crystal can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in election law, you can't have a referendum on the ballot that would affect the offices that are also on the ballot. So it has to be done in a year in that the offices up for election in Hudson are not on the ballot. That's all.
And that, just to speak to that, that's where you're going to have to look at the effective date. So none of this is going to be effective this year. That's why we're looking at having it effective in 2023.
Right, something that would, a referendum that would be come up in 2021 can affect 2022. But earlier somebody was talking about, oh, we'll you know, put the referendum about supervisors up next year. And
Right.
I just wanted to say, you can't do it in an odd year. You have to do it in an even year in Hudson.
I think that's correct. I think what you're saying, Hillary, is that the earliest that this could happen in the event that we were able to do it. Obviously, we can't do it this year. I don't think it's feasible. Because first of all, as Ryan was saying, you have to get some momentum behind something like this. But I think the earliest we could do it would be 2024.
Well, no, actually, technically, I think it would be 23 because our terms are up at the end of 23.
No, but there would be. But you're doing a referendum and there would be people running on the ballot, because at the time of the referendum in 2023, you'd have 5 people running for county supervisor in each of the wards. You'd also have a referendum on the ballot saying, oh, by the way, we're going to eliminate the 5 county supervisors and have 1. Unless you did it with an effective date of 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
6, whatever. Yeah, right.
But so we can still move that ahead, and then it's just here's the runway for the remainder of it. Exactly.
Right. And so anyone elected in 2023 for 2024, assuming it had passed, would be elected to a term that was going to cease to exist in 2 years, to a position that was going to cease to exist in 2 years. If it went to 1 supervisor, right?
Correct.
Let's see. Hillary, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Let's see, I'm going to go back. Steve, your hand is up.
Yeah, just one other point. And I know this is a fact, so there's not debate. Gunnar told me this in an extensive conversation I had with him, the administrative assistant to Dee Dee Barrett. It is indeed too late to fix this law within the assembly session, which ceases in 10 days. So the delay, while we're too busy to attend to this issue, has really bitten us in the ass. That's number one. So but as I say, the fix is to do it first thing next year with beautiful, carefully drafted legislation with retroactive effect. That's the fix. The other thing is, I don't know if your attorney, Ms. Peck, has looked yet at my enabling legislation, the legal descriptions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or not, because that is before you, including my fix today.
Steve, not to interrupt you, but I'm going to. Just a reminder, I appreciate that when you sent them, but if you're going to ask for something to be sent
So
before
I'm
any
sorry,
committee-
no, that's
the
on
council.
you, Ryan.
No,
That's
no,
on-
no, Margaret, I understand, but let me finish, right? It's that it would need to be submitted within 24 hours before to be in accordance with public meeting law. So that is to say, cut Crystal a break here, right? By the time that we got anything, it was literally 4 o'clock this afternoon. Nobody has the chance to read all of the court opinions and whatnot. So I say that to please ask you to dial your tone down a little bit when you're trying to go all against Crystal here, okay?
I'm not against Crystal, although I disagree with her approach. And God bless you for defending her and so forth. And I'm not interested in procedure. I'm interested in the past, the spilt milk. We can't reverse or unring the bell. Okay? You understand that, Mr. Wallace? I assume you do. I'm going forward, and all I'm saying is that going forward, the question I had for Ms. Peck, which was not an adversary question, unlike some of the adversary content of my letter, Ms. Peck, is did you read my remedial legislation and vet it carefully, as I begged all smart eyes to look at? And are you comfortable with it, or do you wish to make changes? That was my only question, Mr. Wallace. Thank you very much.
Mr. Dunn, I have not had a chance to go through the entire piece of legislation that you've provided yet. I will be doing so before the formal meeting, which is next week. I have started going through it. I have not completed it yet.
Thanks.
And there you have it. Thank you. Bye.
Hillary, your hand is up. Is that from before or your new question?
She's putting it down, I think.
Okay. Let's see. I think that covers what we needed to discuss. Crystal, is there anything else you think we need to go through?
I think that covers it. Yeah, I think that covers it.
Okay, so next steps here. I think I unfortunately will not be at the full council meeting next week. I don't know, Tom, if it's possible to have a special meeting just on this particular topic to move it forward. But I think we need to now have recommendation to the full council with the revisions that we had approved back in February, that we are going with, with the maps that we had drawn. Most of those documents are ready. I can put together the demographic information. And that then we would take it to the council recommending that we move forward with these new lines.
Margaret, if you have a summary on this that you want read aloud at the meeting, I'm happy to be your proxy for that on next week.
I would like to be able to vote on it though. I don't know if we can vote on it next week. Can we?
No, I don't think so. We would have to have a formal recommendation coming out of this that then, I believe if it's any law element to, it needs to sit on our desks for 30 days. So we could introduce it at the next meeting, but we would not be able to vote on it then formally until the
Okay.
So
All right. So,
what
all
we
right,
want
let's do that. I'll send you something, Ryan.
Yeah, I can read a statement. We would have to have something for the informal
Yeah.
in June. Well, actually, no, so you're gonna have to have a special meeting.
We're going to have a special meeting because we have to get this done. So I recirculated the thing that Steve had put together in April, which did all of the district lines and so on. Steve, Crystal, I believe you have the language that Steve had put together around the, I'm not sure, do we have language that amended the dates from July 1 to January 1, that we're going to act on it by July 1 and implement in January? We may need language on that. I need to look into that.
I submitted that
Yeah.
to you, and yes, it does.
April, correct?
So yes,
Yes.
I changed the language in
Yep.
my submission
Yep.
to make it crystal clear. The effective date is January 1, 2023.
Yep.
Thank you for
Let me go back and look at that and make sure everybody has their copy of it. That, I believe that was done in April.
Margaret, does the committee also want to, with the law that's going to be passed, that's going to be subject to the referendum, do you also want to at the same time change the time frame that this has to be done? So instead of being, July 1st.
No, that's what Steve just said.
Okay, because I think what Steve was talking about, the law, I just pulled up the one that was circulated, has the effective date being January 1st, 2023 of the local law, but not the actual time frame for reapportionment. I don't think that was changed in it.
No, if the effective date is January 1, 2023, the law has no force in effect, and therefore the ward lines, the supervisor lines, everything else is the status quo. So no, there's no effect until the end of 2022, at which time the effective date kicks in. So I think it's crystal, but Ms. Peck, if you have better language with which you're more comfortable, God bless you, and insert that language if you so wish. Okay, fair enough.
I think we're talking about two different things. I'm not talking about the effective date of the reapportionment. I'm talking about the time frame in the charter, the July 1st deadline. In
The charter is
Well,
that's different.
Just if we pass it by July 1, we've obviously conformed to it. If we don't, Ms. Peck, granted, we're in violation of the law, but as soon as we pass it soon thereafter, who is prejudiced by our late adoption of the law? The answer is nobody. And the legal risk, unlike some other issues in this matter, is de minimis. That's my opinion, Ms. Beck. Thank you.
That's not what I was referring to. I was just talking about changing the actual time frame in the charter. The charter says that the reapportionment has to happen every time it happens by July 1st. I'm just talking about making a tweak on that section.
Right, that is something, Crystal, that I think we need.
Oh, you mean in 2030, when the next time we go through this, I agree with you, Ms. Beck. That's a good idea, but we don't need to attend to that just right now. What we need to attend to just right now is getting this right in a timely manner, in my humble opinion. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. So I think that's it. Ryan, I will get a document for you. We will bring this to the council next week and move forward from there. And since it is a law change, it has to sit there for a month, as Ryan said. I think we may need to do a special meeting to make sure everything is timely.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm just going to go around one more time. Any committee members have anything else to add? Okay. We have some council members that we've not heard from. Dominic and Vicky, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm good, Margaret. I agree with a lot of different things that were said today, but I hope it, everything moves along and we pass this. That's all.
Dominic?
No, I'm good. I'm just educating myself and thanking you guys for doing this work.
Okay, and I don't see any other hands raised from the public. So I
Thank you,
think,
Crystal, for taking the time and for also answering all our questions. And it's cool to learn about this stuff on top of it all. So thank you for entertaining all our questions.
thank you. Okay, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Have a good
Not
day,
me.
everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Enjoy the
Thanks,
rest of the sunshine.
Have a good night.